Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Margaret Clover, a granddaughter of a Swedish immigrant, was born in Forest City, Iowa in 1915. After graduating from Bethel Junior College and Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, she directed church choirs, she led Christian education programs with statewide duties, and taught adults in leadership seminars. Margaret then moved to Baltimore, Maryland to work in the home office of a national nursing home chain. In 1976, she came to Iowa City to serve as a house mother at the Tri-Delt sorority. Retiring from the house in 1980, Margaret became active with the senior citizen activities, serving on the Senior Center Commission both as vice president and president, and teaching at the Senior Center handwork and gospel music classes. She completed a course in peer counseling sponsored by the Senior Center and the Johnson County Mental Health Association. Following the death of her son from AIDS in 1987, she became an educator and lecturer on the impact of AIDS on the family. She was an important member of the AIDS support group in Iowa City, which later became the Johnson County Eye Care Organization. She helped many families through her efforts. Margaret loves to read, do handcraft items, write poetry, and is currently working on her family's stories. She raised two sons, Stephen and Paul, and a daughter, Mary, and she has 7 grandchildren. Thanks for being a guest on One of a Kind, Margaret. I know your story begins in Forest City, Iowa in 1915. And tell me a bit about your mother, who had 9 children. She was very, very busy.
Well, my mother came from Sweden, and they were in Des Moines because my mother was a city person in Sweden, and they were professional people. My grandfather was a tailor. And so they settled in Des Moines, but the Swedish Baptist Church in Des Moines and the Swedish Baptist Church in Forest City, the young people got together. And that's how my mother became a Forest City farmer's wife. And they lived in the log cabin that my grandfather built. I think it was about 65 or 69, 17. And then later he built a large house, and she raised part of her children there, but they moved to their own farm. And 1915 I was born, and in 1918 my father died. So she was left alone with 8 children, really. And during the war, my older brothers tended the farm, and then I think about 1925 we moved to Des Moines. She wanted to go back to Des Moines.
What did she do in Des Moines, Margaret?
Then she was a tailor. She did men tailoring for Foreman and Clark, for Frankel's, and then in another little store that did professional tailoring. You know, you came in and she would do the tailoring on the suits. So I grew up, I used to work with her in the shop. I learned how to shorten pants and make them smaller and turn up a good hem, and how to
and you're still sewing, because you showed me this book you have of dolls that you made. Margaret, these are delightful.
Well,
about yay high.
About yay high. They're about a 6-month-old size doll.
And you've sold them all? And
sold them, and I don't know how many I made, probably 20 or so. But
and you moved from tailoring to crocheting
and embroidery, and I made almost all of my children's clothes. I made Mary's first formal dress when she was in high school. It was pretty fancy.
Tell me, this summer, you told me before the interview, in this log cabin that your father or grandfather built, you're going to have a family reunion.
We're planning a family reunion.
Tell me about this.
In August. It's a large family, lots of cousins, and because my grandfather's family was large, I think there were 9 in his family, so there's quite a few descendants. They expect about 250 people coming into Forest City. We're going to be located in Waldorf. They've opened the college for us. And so I'm busy. I and my sister and a cousin are the only 3 living grandchildren of this man who built the cabin. So we're kind of the...
You're the organizers.
No. We're not organizing. We're just the informative people. They keep asking us, send us recipes. What was it like? What did you do? How was it living on the farm? And so I've been writing stories, not history, but just stories.
So you're the resource people, the 3 of you, for your family. Oh, I hope you're going to videotape it. It's going to be a wonderful celebration of your family.
I don't know what it's in good hands. I have a nephew who's really taken over there's about 6 or 7 cousins that are doing it, and it's going to be 4 days. They've got 4 days of activities all lined up. And the people who own the farm now and restored the cabin, it's now a museum. And the funny thing is, I went up to Waldorf to go to an elder hostel, and I was looking over the program. It says, one day we're going out to the Lundstrom cabin. I said, what? That's mine. First time I had known that that they had turned it into a museum. So that's how I got some publicity again. I went to the newspaper, and they were very interested that I was a granddaughter of
the Lundstroms.
Of Pete Lundstrom, who built the cabin. He worked for the railroad, and he was deeded 140 acres. This is a little hazy because some say he bought it and some say it was deeded, but I say it was deeded then, so I'm authentic.
And that's wonderful. I want to ask you, after you left Des Moines, you went up to the St. Paul area and graduated from Bethel College. What drew you into church work? I know you've probably been a church member all your life, but you were directing church choirs and leading Christian education programs.
I was singing in the choir when I was about 7 years old. I've always been in a choir. We didn't think of doing anything else on Sunday. It was part of the family ritual. We went to church, and it was a Swedish community. It was a Swedish Baptist church in East Des Moines, and it was an extended family, and it was a safe place. I had uncles and aunts and cousins and there that were my mother's relatives. And I just have always been very interested in the biblical history. And so after I graduated from East High in '33, and there wasn't any money much to go to colleges or do anything more, but Bethel Seminary was open to Swedish Baptists who wanted to further, so I went up there. And that's how I got some of my theological training.
Well, then you were off to another adventure. It just sounds like one door closes and another door opens, and you walk right through it. You went to Baltimore, Maryland, and worked for years.
Well,
did you know anybody in Baltimore?
The reason I went out east was my son Stephen had a store in Provincetown on the Cape, and he asked me if I would come out and help him, because at that time I was working as a did bookkeeping. And he said, Mama, I need somebody to keep my books and help me. So I went out to help him, and I was with him for about a year, and then decided I just really needed to come back, and I stopped in Baltimore with a sister of mine for another year and worked there. And I kept getting closer and closer to Iowa, and I thought, I've just got to get back, and picked up a paper and saw an ad that they wanted a house mother. I answered it, and I got the job, and so I came back to Iowa City.
And tell me about those 4 years as a Tri-Delt house mother.
Well, there was good times, there was bad times, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
What did you like the best about that
The
job?
best about it was getting to know the girls. Some really wonderful young women go through, and you get to know, you see them mature from this highfalutin freshman up to the serious senior who really is now just socking it in and knowing what she's going to do. So it was a rewarding experience.
Did you have to listen to some problems along the way?
A few. A few.
You brought some wonderful pictures of some wild parties, Margaret. I don't know if they'd believe you up at Bethel Seminary
yes.
with those parties. That was fun.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And they liked me because I entered into their parties, and I would dress according to their theme, and they just got a big kick out of me.
Got a lot to write about. Then after you retired from being a house mother, you got very involved with the senior center in
yes,
activities, teaching and.
Yeah, Betty Mizell tapped me on the shoulder and wanted to know if I wouldn't consider being on the commission, and so I said, sure, why not? And I was appointed by the
mayor, I think.
The council. And I served for 7 years as a commissioner. And we were the first commission, and we had a lot of work. We did all the groundwork for the bylaws and wrote the book on what the direction that we thought it should take, and we spent hours writing and rewriting and wording and doing that whole first book. And sort of set the pace for what the senior center was to be to the community and to the people.
It's a vibrant place.
It's a vibrant place. I really am happy for
Were
it.
you on the commission at the time that they had moved into the old post office?
Oh, yes. In fact, I was on the commission while they were building that, and we would go up and inspect it every once in a while and see how it was coming and get all excited about what we were going to have, where, and it was an exciting time. So then we moved in.
And then you started teaching. Tell me about this. You were teaching
Well,
handwork classes?
I would do classes. Actually, one of my volunteer things as a commissioner was to set up the eldercraft shop. We decided we should have a place where people could bring their handwork. And I was the commissioner who got that going and set up the bookkeeping system and got that one going. And as we needed classes and things, I always either volunteered to teach or I went to a lot of classes. I especially enjoyed the drama classes. I know Jody Hoffman was there, and I enjoyed being in her classes.
Well, tell me about this interest in gospel music.
They would do a series of things, and it was a month long, and each week or each session was highlighted by someone in the community who had a little know-how about what was going on. They had one was the chanting, the Gregorian chants was led. I don't remember the name of the professor who led that. I did one on gospel music. Jody Hovland did one on dance and movement. And there was a fourth one, I can't recall it. There's a brochure someplace that has it in. And when they said, we should have one on, I said, I'll do it.
I'll volunteer.
I'll do it. So I did a lot of research. I spent hours in the library here going through books on the early gospel music, and came up with a pretty good 2-hour lecture.
Do you listen to it now?
Oh yeah, I have it on tape, and I think it's somewhere here in the archives too on tape. So yeah, that was a nice piece of work.
Tell me what got you involved in the peer counseling program? You took the course, I read.
Just another thing that I felt interested in, and wanted to be of service if I could be. So I took that course.
Are peer counselors, are they mostly listeners, or do you kind of get people connected with another person who could help them?
Well, yeah, if someone calls in and wants some help, you are assigned to a person. And it's mostly listening. It's not too much giving advice, but it's a listener, a friend, someone that maybe can open a door for them to find some help in another area. So it's a stepping stone. Mm-hmm.
Well, another part of your story is what happened in 1987. Your son Stephen was a divinity student,
Right.
moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, and developed AIDS, and in 1987 died. Tell me a bit about him and his work out in Berkeley, because I know he made a big, big difference to a lot of people out there.
Yes, he did. He took his first years in seminary in Cambridge, and then transferred to the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. And en route, he stopped to see me, and it was in the fall. It was about in August or so. And he went on out to California and got himself situated, and he has a tape, and in the tape he says that he was all settled in, and he got very, very ill. And though he had an inkling that he might have AIDS, he was in denial, and it wasn't until the doctor told him, yes, you have a full-blown case of AIDS, that he began to accept it. And as he lived another almost 2 years, year and a half. And during that time, he did a lot of speaking. The tape that he gave me is part of it is a little sermon that he gave, and what it means to have AIDS, and relating it to his faith. And then the latter part of it is an interview. He's sitting in a chair like we are, and he's just talking, person to person, on what it's like, what it feels like, what you do, how you cope. And it has been very helpful to anybody that I've shown it to. I think probably there's 10 people in Iowa City that haven't seen it.
Well, that was brave of him to do it, and courageous, and courageous of you to get so involved. And you started to take, you went around into different churches. You were lecturing
well, I had probably a program at least once a month. It all started after he called me. It was like about in January or so, and told me on the phone. He said, I wanted to come and see you, but I couldn't. And I was just devastated. And I called my pastor immediately, and we talked. And I tried to find a support group here in Iowa City. There wasn't anything. I did finally find a few of the young men who were meeting together, but very, very secretive. And when I said I would like to come, they wouldn't even let me come until somebody came to interview me. Now, that's how they had to be hidden. I went public, first in my church. I stood up. My pastor had given a sermon called The Modern Day Leper. And in closing, he said, and there is in our congregation a family who has now been touched with AIDS, and that's all he said. And I said, Ed, I can't let it go at that. So I stood up and said probably the hardest 5 words I've ever said in my life. It's my son that has AIDS, and I need your help. And it was like the dam burst, and people were so wonderful and so supportive. And it just started from that. I found the group, and I went to the support group on Sunday afternoons. It was young men mostly. There were 2 or 3 young women. There was one other mother. And we shared our grief and our sorrows, and found strength in each other. And most of the men are gone now. They're just not here. from that it grew and it became a, you know, a more open thing. So as people began to realize that AIDS is something we have to pay attention to, I spoke over at the university, I spoke to care groups, I spoke to the chaplains, I spoke to many church groups, but they all called me. I didn't go out and solicit. They were coming in right and left, even from out of town. So I was pretty busy for 2 or 3 years just
What did they ask you, these families who were like you, kind of in shock? What did they want to know from you, or did they want to see the tape of Stephen?
They wanted to see the tape mostly, and church people were very interested in the fact that a minister could be gay and could have AIDS. This was totally out of their thinking.
So you could share with them.
Right, right. It was a new concept. It just blew the minds. So it
was an important mission of yours.
It was an important statement, yes.
You told me before the interview that there are 5 squares on the quilt.
That's right.
In honor of your son. That's wonderful.
Yeah, the one from Provincetown where he was in business, one from the seminary out there, and the other 3, and one from Minnesota with his name on it, and I think probably some from out in California, and I don't know who those are, but I have the pictures of the 5 blocks.
Well, what's happened now in Iowa City, in our community? Now we have a very visible support group, don't we, for families and for patients suffering from AIDS.
Actually,
we have come a ways, haven't we, Margaret?
Yeah. I was asked to speak at the Episcopal Church, and it was in after that the pastor there was very interested, and I think it was they decided that they had to do something, and they are the ones that turned a portion of their building over to the AIDS program.
My last question about Stephen, I read that he was quite a builder of bridges, that in Berkeley he got Afro-American and a gay church together.
That's right.
And
yeah, he was quite an advocate of togetherness. And there was a Black Baptist church. In fact, they had come to visit him in the hospital, and that's how he got to know them. And then the community church that he went to, which was a gay church, and the Black pastor said, I never would have believed that we would sit in the same pew, that we would take communion together, that we would sing together, that we would hug, that we would be brothers. And there was quite a write-up in the Berkeley paper on that particular.
He gave the community a gift.
Yes, he did.
Where, through all of this, these 80 years you've been on this planet, where have you drawn your strength, or where do you get your strength, Margaret?
Well, it comes from a faith that was passed on to me from my mother, from my family, a deep and abiding faith that there's a purpose in life. And I guess I've always laughingly said to my daughter, look, honey, if you knock on a door and it opens, you better walk through it. And I sort of have knocked on doors all my life. I had to get out and scratch my own living. I had to have a job. I had to provide for my own well-being, and it wasn't easy because I was not prepared to work. But somehow, whenever I needed a job, a door would open, and there
you walked right
and
through.
I would walk through.
And your daughter sounds like she's just inherited. She is got her law degree.
She's a pretty wonderful person.
Oh, and she's working for
she works
Northern
for the,
Illinois University.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful. And you have 7 grandchildren.
That's right. And 4 great-grandchildren.
And 4 great-grandchildren. Well, in your spirit, I don't know where you ever had time to do all this, in your writing of your stories, you have enjoyed writing poetry.
Yes.
And you gave me a little book to look at, and I was wondering if you'd share a couple of your poems. One I'm picking because I grew up on molasses cookies, and I just immediately related to that. And then read the second one on the seashell.
Okay. I'll take water here.
Please do. So there's a poem on molasses and the revelations of a seashell.
Molasses cookies. Quickly running home from school, I'd cut across the neighbor's lawn. Then, long before I'd reach my door, I'd smell a smell I'd smelt before. My mama's baking cookies, rich molasses cookies, soft brown molasses cookies, warm, sweet molasses cookies. I'd turn the knob and I'd lift the latch, burst into the kitchen in time to catch out of the oven the first big batch of sweet molasses cookies, rich molasses cookies, warm brown molasses cookies. She'd give me some, maybe 3 or 4, a glass of milk for me she'd pour, then say to me, now, no more sweet molasses cookies or rich molasses cookies, warm brown molasses cookies. I've roamed the world a bit since then. My hair is gray, my eyes grow dim, but tongue and nose can ne'er forget the taste and smell of all of those sweet molasses cookies. Soft, warm molasses cookies, brown, rich molasses cookies.
Do you have a plate? That's wonderful.
The seashell has a little story behind it that I think I should tell you. I was at the Elder Hostel poetry workshop, and our instructor said, now I want you to take an object, and I want you to look at it as long as it takes for it to start to talk to you. I have quite a collection of seashells, and I picked one out it's a round one, and it's called the bullseye, and it goes into circles into the center. And this is what I wrote after looking at that shell for a whole day. I stare into your eye, the center of spiraling circles, and I feel the tug and wash of the tides. Spray like dew mist covers my face and leaves the tangy taste of salt brine on my lips. The life you harbored in the sea was well protected until it needed you no more, then spewed you out upon the shore. But in its lifetime created the beauty that we see in your concentric circles, ever whirling blue and gray, melding where life and death meet in the one brief instant we call time.
It's lovely. Thank you, Margaret, for being my guest. My guest on One of a Kind has been Margaret Clover. She has led an active and involved life in church work, senior citizen work, and helping others. In 1984, she was awarded the Certificate of Appreciation for outstanding service and commitment toward a higher quality of life for senior citizens in the Iowa City community. Following the death of her son from AIDS in 1987, Margaret became an educator and lecturer on AIDS and how it affects the family. Margaret has met life's tragedies and difficulties with courage and a positive attitude. As my research assistant said, she fought the good fight. Margaret Clover is one of a kind.